I'd just like to welcome you all here today. The opportunity has arisen for us to host a TCCI Leaders Luncheon in Hobart. This has been in the planning for about 18 months, and we're very, very pleased to have our first guest speaker as Bob Annells, as I'm sure you'll agree with me once you've heard his presentation. But I'd just like to welcome again His Excellency the Governor, Peter Underwood. Thank you very much, sir, for taking the time to come today. We have apologies from the Lord Mayor of Hobart, Alderman Damon Thomas, but we're very pleased, thank you, for the Deputy Lord Mayor, Alderman Ron Christie, to fill in that space. We noticed, Ron, that you don't wear a big black hat either, but also, that's right. Also the President of the Legislative Council, the Honourable Sue Smith, the Honourable Craig Farrell, and Rebecca White MP will be arriving a little bit later. Also to the TCCI Chair, Mr Troy Harper, and to TCCI board members who are present here today. And I think we've got 5 here today, and we've sort of sprinkled them around the table, so you may be in luck, or however you decide, to have a board member on your table. But as I say, Troy Harper is our chair, Rhonda McLaughlin, John White, Grant Dunham and Andrew Heap. I'm going to leave the introduction to Bob of his TAS board, but I do particularly also thank Bob as TasRail Executive Chairman and his wife Tanya for coming today and also addressing us, and also to Roger Gill as TasRail Director. So we're now going to have entree, then main course, and at 1 o'clock I'll come back up and introduce Bob, and he will then commence his address, which will go through till about 1:35. Then we'll have just a couple of, I'll ask our chairman to give a vote of thanks to Bob. I'll just close with a couple of bits and pieces, mainly the drawing of the business card for the Tasmanian bottles of wine. So if you haven't got your business card in yet, I think there's a bucket floating around. It was out on the front. And then we'll be closing and be finished right on time at 5 to 2. So thank you again for coming, and please enjoy your meal. I'd just like to introduce our guest speaker today, Mr Bob Annells. The presentation will take about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for questions at the end of that. Bob was born in Hobart in 1948 and was educated at the Friends School. Your Excellency, another plug for Friends there. Yep. He holds qualifications as a land valuer and as a town planner. We might need to get you back at the moment. I think there's a bit of a need for a push in that direction. He's best remembered in his early... Excuse me. Bob's best remembered in his early years as a world-class 800-metre runner. His professional career commenced when appointed at the tender age of 35 as Director General of Lands, Parks and Wildlife. Would have been an interesting position in those days. After 5 years in that role, he was appointed the Secretary of the Department of Tourism, Sport and Recreation, a position he held for 5 years. Then he left Tasmania in 1992 to take up a position as the inaugural Chief Executive of the Docklands Redevelopment Authority in Melbourne. This massive development project remains to this day the largest inner urban development project in Australia. It must have been an incredible opportunity and a daunting one for Bob at that time. He was appointed by Jeff Kennett to head Tourism Victoria in 1993 with telling effect. The Jigsaw marketing campaign he created is still being utilised nearly 20 years later. He was concurrently the Deputy Chairman of Melbourne Major Events Company, and if you just think things like the Grand Prix, the 500cc motorcycles, President's Golf Club, they're the sorts of events that were going through that. And he was also appointed Chairman of the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre, or on their board. And if you think Jeff's big shed down there on near Southgate, and a position he still holds today after nearly 14 years. Bob left the public sector in 1998 and established both Annells Consulting and with two colleagues created Cummins and Partners. Cummins and Partners, an advertising agency that was twice awarded Agency of the Year in Victoria, and some of their client base were companies like Virgin Airlines, General Motors Holden and Target. Annells Consulting was a boutique management consulting firm that after 3 years was purchased by its largest client. I like that sort of story. And indeed, that client was Veolia Transport. Many in this state wouldn't understand or know that Veolia that we know of here, looking after all the mess that we generally create on a day-to-day basis, is actually one of the world's largest transport companies. And in fact, Veolia Transport also secured Bob's full attention and services in representing them in the very, very complex negotiations with the Victorian government over the Metropolitan Train franchise. This contract had been signed 18 months earlier and even by then was universally recognised and regarded as a complete dog and was estimated to lose Veolia €600 million over its 15-year term. So a bit of a challenge that Bob took on in those days. Bob assumed the role of chairman of Veolia Transport Australia, Australia's largest passenger transport company with turnover in excess of $800 million per annum, as well as executive chair of Connex Melbourne. That's the company that runs the suburban trains. He stayed with these companies for 7 years and in the process secured new and acceptable terms for the company in relation to the Victoria Metropolitan Rail contract and oversaw the rapid expansion of the company into New Zealand and the Asia Pacific. He accepted appointment as part-time executive chairman of TasRail in December 2009, and from 2006 to earlier this year was also chairman of Tourism Tasmania. He was awarded the Public Service Medal in the 2001 Queen's Birthday Honours List, and together with his wife Tanya, they returned to Tasmania in 2010 and together farmed the property known as Stockdale in the Coal River Valley. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please join with me in welcoming Mr. Bob Annells.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, no, never a truer word was said about the daunting prospect of leaving Tasmania and becoming established in Melbourne as the Chief Executive of the Docklands Authority, and very few people would have felt as ill-equipped as I did to do it, but it happened, and I was made aware by my then chairman that the first thing I had to do, whatever happened, was to secure the Docklands as the site for the new Melbourne casino. And in my diary had been put a meeting, no more than a week in to my tenure, a meeting with Macquarie Bank and a group of other people, unspecified as to number, who were coming to see me about the possibility of selecting a Docklands site for the casino. They arrived, I was shown into the boardroom, and there were 15 of Melbourne's most venerable commercial characters, led by the Australian head of Macquarie Bank, who sat next to me on my right, and his 15 suited acolytes spread around the table. And I thought I was nervous, but I didn't realise quite how nervous I was, and I was playing, I had in my hand a red pen, and somehow, as I'm sitting talking to this guy, this red pen suddenly whirred out of my hand, leaving the cap in one hand, but it whirred straight over the top of this guy's head, hit the wall and bounced back at my feet. I picked it up, put it back, apologised profusely, turned back to him, and he had red spots all the way up his forehead. My career really never did take off after that experience. I want to acknowledge Roger Gill, one of my fellow directors for TasRail, and one of the very hard-working fellow directors. Roger, welcome. And of course, Damien White, the Chief Executive, and other senior staff of TasRail. This is a presentation about a journey that's only just started. It has some years to go and in a sense will never finish, because railways never finish in terms of their need for tender loving care. But a lot can be achieved, certainly, and we expect to in the 5 years. This presentation has a lot of facts and figures in it. It's just the nature of talking about the rail. And so I'm using a PowerPoint presentation which has two characteristics. One is, has the potential to be extremely boring. And secondly, the probability of the technology failing is about 50% based on long experience. In fact, I gave this same presentation 2 days ago in Luncheon and we didn't get 3 slides in before it collapsed. This is a narrow gauge railway. What does that mean? It means it has a narrow gauge. The reality is that it is less stable than a standard gauge railway, and it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means there's a lot less tolerance for error, and you have to be extremely gentle with it and acknowledge its limitations. And those limitations are not just about the interface between the wheels and the rail. They are, in fact, the way in which the train tends to move, and therefore the loading of containers, for example, onto the train is much more sensitive in relation to narrow gauge. And so that's an issue for us, and we live with it daily. There's a long history of Tasmanian Rail, which I'm not going to bore you with, but the fact is that in the last 5 to 7 years, Pacific National controlled all of the rail in Tasmania, both below and above rail, that is the tracks and the infrastructure on the one hand, with the rolling stock and the business on the other. They negotiated with the state for the state to take back the below rail obligation in 2007, and that obligation was managed by the Rail Management Branch of the Department of Infrastructure for a couple of years prior to the establishment of TasRail. The Commonwealth stepped up to the plate at that point, put $78 million in as what's called rail rescue, always meant to be a short-term fix, and then a memorandum of understanding was entered into between the state and the Commonwealth, which in total came to around about 200+ million. I'll come back to that in a minute. There was a dispute, I think, largely manufactured between Pacific National and Tasports in 2009, which led to them threatening to throw the keys on the table and cease all operations, and put the Tasmanian government and Norm McIlfactrick in an extremely difficult position, which is wonderful. The reality is that the state had no choice. You know, people can argue about it, but the reality is that there were many businesses that totally relied upon rail, and the social disruption, apart from the loss of economic activity, should rail cease, was just not worth contemplating. So the state actually bought back the business and the above rail side of the business, that is all of the rolling stock, but the business itself, and that is the dealing with customers, the existing customer base, etc. And they put together, together with Treasury, the concept of TasRail being a state-owned corporation. And we started in the 1st of December 2009. Now, that was a fairly character-building process, because both the Rail Management Branch and Pacific National's Tasmanian Division were much smaller elements of very large organisations who provided all of the backup that you would expect of for large organisations. We didn't have a lot of that, and we've been building that capacity very strongly over the last 2 years. But it did, for the first time, bring back into government ownership all of the rail elements of significance in Tasmania, including the West Coast Line, which the state had never owned, was always privately owned prior to that. And we got a vertically integrated railway. Now, what does that mean? It means that you've got the levers in your hands of every element of the business to determine whether you're successful or not. The problem with that is you've got absolutely no one else to blame if it doesn't work. So you're responsible from everything from the foundation to the sleepers to the rail to the bridges, etc., but you're also responsible for all of the rolling stock and your interaction with customers and providing good services, etc., etc. In our case, The interesting thing is that we were running an existing business from day one. There was no honeymoon period, no relaxing while we sort of sorted out the wheat from the chaff and how we should do things. We actually, from day one, were running a business, and from day one we had responsibility to spend, as you'll see later, $400 million over a 5-year period with, I'd have to say, a great deal of goodwill, but not a lot of expertise in things that really mattered, like procurement policy and procedures. Above rail is self-evident, it's all the rolling stock. We would have probably preferred not to have got much of it because, as you'll see a bit later, it was life expired in probably 1986, and we've been doing something about that as fast as we can. So the final thing I just want to make is we inherited a business, we inherited clients, a lot of long-suffering clients, some of whom are in this room, and one of our top priorities from Damien White, the Chief Executive, and the board, has been to work really hard to try and make this a customer-centric business. One of the real challenges here is you get so bound up in the engineering, the big stuff, that you actually lose sight of the fact you're in business, and business means customers, means service. And so from our point of view, it's been really pleasing that Damien and the senior management team have been so absolutely committed to trying to build, forge decent relationships and have a real commitment to provide that service. The network, I'll very briefly point out one thing, this possibly won't work. The Brighton hub is, I don't know if people can see this, but of course is out here. This means that this link into Hobart will cease as an operating line when we take over the Brighton hub, and that we should be able to move our facilities there within possibly the next 12 months with a bit of luck. The significance of that is that it takes us somewhat closer, and at least about an hour in running time, to Burnie. Why you'd want to be closer to Burnie is a good question, but in our case, we do, because that's where, sorry, Sue, that's where, geez, I'm going to pay for that in estimates. That's where one of our major clients wants us to deliver a good proportion of our freight. And so a reduction of 1 hour running time both ways makes it the achievement of a 24-hour turnaround south of Tasmania to Burnie actually possible, and that has a huge impact on our ability to deliver what we need to deliver. I'm going to run through this very quickly because it's just a lot of stats, but there is 630 odd kilometres of operating line. We've got a stack of non-operational track, but we still have to maintain that. This is a difficult topography. We have 355 bridges, most of them built 50, 70, 100 years ago, and on the west coast built out of wood. And so we have a real challenge here, and right now we're looking at the 4 major bridges on the northwest coast. 2 of them we're going to replace, 2 of them we will extensively upgrade, and you're looking at 24 million as a minimum on those 4 bridges alone. So you can start to understand just what a large and expensive business this is. The other significant investment here is that at least 50% of the track, 50% of 630 kilometres, was laid or relayed with second-hand rail out of the Simpson Desert from South Australia, I think it was, around about 40 years ago, and it's lightweight rail. It was fine at the time, but with modern train weights, and certainly the train weights we're moving to with new rolling stock, is totally and utterly unrealistic for us to operate on that sort of rail. So we're in the market to buy nearly 300 to 400 kilometres of rail, and we're scouring for opportunities to do that because new stuff is incredibly expensive. And just to add to the complexity, there's about 1.3 million sleepers. Some of them have been replaced with steel, but nevertheless, they were all, when we started, wood. And wooden sleepers in Tasmania have a life expectancy of 30 to 40 years, and most of them have been in there 70 years. So all of those 1.3 million sleepers at some point are going to have to go. Doesn't get any better because When you look at our above rail capability, we are talking here, we've got 36 locomotives at the present time. They are on average, I'm guessing, but 40 to 45 years old. And half of them, or sorry, a third of them, you can't buy spares for. So we have a group of absolutely wonderful people in our workshop making spares up. And we have the most cannibalistic arrangements imaginable as we slowly devour our own fleet, leaving behind, as Roger Gill said when he drove me in the first time to our base in Launceston, it would make you wonder as we looked around which part of Mali you were in. And that's what it looks like. It was just appalling. And that's been largely now at least put on hold. We're a lot better than we were. But nevertheless, there's a challenge. We have 374 wagons, 5 different types, different loading capacity on each and every one of them. It means that it's incredibly difficult to get your wagons where you need them for your customer in the loading capacity that the customer needs. And in fact, if you put the two elements together, given that we run trains up and down the main line here in 3 or 4 consists, so 3 or 4 engines, only one driver, but 3 or 4 engines. And if you've got 4 different engine types and many of them are not compatible, you can't run them together, then it's a wonder, quite frankly, with our diversity of wagons that we ever get a train away at all. And yet we do, and we run roughly 115 services a week. We have ship loaders and bulk storage. So in that context, we're not just a freight operator or a train operator. We're starting very much to move into a much fuller service to our clients than most people would consider. The freight task, for the sake of Robert, who saw this on Tuesday and wasn't smart enough to work out what the first drop point meant, what it means is that the Tasmanian task is 27.7 million tonnes. Now that's across everything from people taking quite small loads that we're never going to contest. It also includes 9 million tonnes of forestry product and we don't carry any of it. And the reason for that is largely safety related. It has to do with this narrow gauge and trying to secure logs on our trains, but we are working on that with forestry as we speak. 92% of the total freight task is by road, and most of it, 63%, is actually big trucks on our main highways. If you look at what we call the contestable freight task, we carry about 20% of that. That is contestable by rail, and we get about 20%. And even at that, we think we've kept 100,000 B double movements off the road a year based on what we currently do. So given that the state's freight task is due to 25% increase within the next decade, if Tasmania as a society doesn't want an increase in the truck traffic with everything that comes from that, and in fact wants to continue a decrease, then the rail is crucial to that. So what are the major challenges? Now, everybody knows that this is a business that is in crisis and needed a massive investment. I won't go back over the issues of rail and other things. What I will say is that both the Tasmanian government and the Commonwealth government have stepped up to the plate very much so and decided to get behind the regeneration of Tasmanian rail. I use a phrase which I hope doesn't offend anybody, but in the railway business you can't be half pregnant. You either run a safe railway or you don't. And in our case, the board took a lot of convincing when we took over that we were able, hand on heart, to say to the safety regulator and to the OH&S people who are watching, and to our own staff, quite frankly, that yes, we are convinced this is safe to operate. You can put all sorts of restrictions on speed and do all sorts of things to make it safer, but fundamentally it's just to such a state, degraded state, that it can't be run safely. Then you shut it down. And you know, we went close, Roger. I think you would agree. We went very close. A couple of early meetings to handing the keys back to Norm and say, well, this is your problem. You worry about it because we can't. But we actually believed that this can be fixed. And so I'll briefly talk about some of the things we're doing. One of the issues, however, that we need to address is this question of a manual train control system. The way we control our trains is manual. It is done on paper by radio. And even with only 115 services a week, when you have track gangs all over the network now, as we are, doing repairs, fixing bridges, etc., and we may have 15 or 20 of them at any one time, they've all got to be controlled as well with all these train movements. It's all happening, or most of it's happening at night. Then in fact you have a major train control challenge doing it manually. So one of the things we need, and we are in the process of acquiring, is in fact a GPS-based, computer-based train control system. And that will enable us to move our total services from the current 6,000 services a year to about 8,000, not quite, 8,000 services a year, which is what our new train plan and our new locomotive and wagon purchases will enable us to do. Now, some of you, and I'll get somebody to take your names, are asking the question, why bother? Well, I've given some of that explanation, I hope. One of it is, however, societal. Rail has a carbon footprint that is estimated by some people to be only up to 80% less than the equivalent of road. So moving a tonne of product 1 kilometre is somewhere up to 80% less of carbon footprint. That was always significant. It's getting a damn sight more significant now because companies are coming to us saying we need to put our product on rail in order to help us achieve our new targets under the new regulations in relation to emissions. So it is a significant benefit for rail over road. We estimate that in the last year alone we saved something like 45,000 tonnes of emissions simply with the freight we are currently carrying. There are other societal issues about safer roads, less accidents, whole range of things, and of course, very significantly, very reduced road maintenance costs the more we can take heavy trucks off the road. And I think there's just a general agreement in society here now that a modern economy, an economy that wants to grasp every growth opportunity that it can, needs rail as an option. Won't work for everybody, but it works for a lot of people. And we're already seeing many opportunities, mainly in the heavy haulage stuff of ore off the west coast and some coal out of Fingal, but we're also seeing a big increase in demand for our container services. And this is not unusual around the world. Around the world, freight rail is having a major resurgence, a renaissance in fact, and we want to very much be part of that. The federal government have taken responsibility for below rail costing and work all around Australia. They do it everywhere else through the Australian Rail Track Corporation. Here, they do it through TasRail. We've got, as I said, about $210 million. We've spent about half of that to this point, and that expires in 2013-14, and we have already put forward our submission to Infrastructure Australia, who will be the first sort of sieve, if you like, of submissions for funding past that point, and we are already in there. It's very important to understand that in Tasmania we are not running a railroad like in many other parts of the world where you have one client or one product that you're hauling. You're hauling millions of tonnes of iron ore or millions of tonnes of coal. Now that's difficult, but trust me, it's a lot easier than when you've got coal, you've got ore, you've got containers, you've got cement, you've got a whole range of different clients and different needs. So from our point of view, one of our responsibilities as a board is to demonstrate to the Commonwealth Government that the further investment that's needed beyond these numbers going forward into 2020 is justified, and we're working hard to do that. And part of that is that we have to be seen by the Commonwealth to be good value for money. In relation to the state, who do above rail work and fund our above rail activity, there will be about $140 million of capital spent from when we started to roughly another 6 years when the funding arrangement ceases. This will enable us to replace our locomotive fleet, or the good proportion of it. It will replace probably 50% of our wagon fleet, and the rest of it we can overhaul. It will also enable us to move into this century with our maintenance equipment. We've replaced, for example, all of our high rail motor vehicles. When we took over, we had motor vehicles that had done 900,000 kilometres. We had crew vehicles carting our drivers backwards and forwards in the middle of the night, 900,000 kilometres. So we have replaced all of that. We have a wheel lathe. You cannot run a railroad without a wheel lathe. It's what rebores the wheels. You need one. We have one. It was life expired in 1986. And our guys are still using it and still doing a good job, and it's $2 million to replace. Nothing in this business is cheap and nothing is quick. Highlights so far, it's a fairly short list. Track condition is improving. If you talk to our drivers and you look, despite having had 2 derailments in a week, they're the first 2 we've had this financial year. So it's so far 2 in 5.5 months, 4.5 months. From our point of view, it is clear there is major improvement of the track, a long way to go. Our capital program is well advanced, but most importantly, our organisational structure and procedures and processes are now approaching what I would regard as acceptable for a business of this size. We have been able to recruit some new train drivers, but you take 6 in and you lose 4 to the Pilbara. We pay them $63,000, the Pilbara pays them $150,000. So younger train drivers, very hard to keep, but we are bringing the train drivers in. I think we've just brought our first female train driver in, and we're working really hard to keep that critical resource up to scratch. In terms of the future, we have gone through and are just about to conclude our tender process for new locomotives. That is an incredibly interesting, challenging process. It's been extraordinarily well run by a consultant we've had working on it together with our own staff, and we are just about to go to government with a recommendation. We don't have a final number, but we will drop our total locomotive numbers from something like 36 as we are now, down to somewhere in the middle to high teens. So new modern equipment has an incredibly increased pulling power. We will, for example, never again have to run consists of locomotives more than 2. So there'll be no more 3 and 4. We only need 2. The total of the purchase of locomotive fleet will be in the vicinity with wagons of about $90 million, and will be finished in 3 years from now. That's some of what I've just said, so I won't go into it again, but the most critical thing here is that our total haulage capacity just on the main line, forget about the West Coast and Fingal and stuff, just on the main line, we will go from 1.9 million tonnes a year to 3.6 million tonnes with these new locomotives alone. And our average train length will go from 500 metres to 750. Now, that in part is to take advantage of the opportunity that presented to us by the Brighton hub. Brighton has extremely long opportunities for us. There are long loads up to 750 metres. Down here at Evans Street, we've got to cut the train into, 150 metre lengths, and a lot of shunting backwards and forwards. Of course, a train system is like a dumbbell. No point putting 750 metres at one end if you get to Burnie and you can only deal with 250. So we're having to work on Burnie, and we are doing a lot of work with TasPorts on that. One of the most important things is the projected availability of our new trains will be 92%, 365 days a year. Our current fleet is something in the order of 78% availability, just because of its age. I won't go through all of that, except that the 24-hour Brighton to Burnie with new trains, more reliable trains, means that that is within reach, not just once or twice a month as it is now, but every time we leave. And that matters because we are coordinating with a shipping schedule, and if we're late, we miss the ship, or our client misses the ship. So for us, it's terribly important that we get consistency and into our service. In conclusion, I would just say, look, a lot has happened. We're quite a way down the track in terms of dealing with the physical, technical needs, and I think we're quite a long way down in terms of our staffing. We've populated our new organisation. We've got the skill sets growing. We're, I think, on top of our drivers, these sorts of things, and we're certainly much more on top of the systems that we need to be a good public service organisation, because that's what we are. We are part of the public service, and getting that challenge right is, getting the balance right is terribly important. There are some terrific examples of new potential clients, particularly in the areas that railways like us really like, and that is consistency, heavy haulage, and that is something that if you can underpin your rest of your business with that, then you've got a real future. And what is that future for us? Then what is the vision that we have here? And that is that we want to become a world-class, vertically integrated short-haul railway. I could spend an hour splitting each one of those three components up and talking about what that means. But for us, it means being as good as we can get, and certainly as good as our comparator railways that are vertically integrated and short haul. And that's what we're trying to work towards, and with the resources we've been given and the great encouragement of our clients and the community generally, I think we're on the way. We're not there, but we are on the way. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Bob. We've got time for a few quick questions. I'm not sure whether... Not sure whether that was me or... there's a roving mic. I think that's what it might have been, the feedback from there. So if you could put your hand up and we'll get a mic to you. If you could just say your name and the organisation you're from and ask your question.
Bob, John White from Delta Hydraulics. At what point does the narrow gauge that you're burdened with become too much of a burden to actually become a world-class short-haul rail operator?
I don't think... I think the answer is never. I think that would be an excuse. I think, in fact, with modern technology, particularly modern bogie technology, you can deal with a lot of the challenges that that narrow gauge present to you, and that perhaps in the past were almost insurmountable. A lot of it can be surmounted with better bogie technology. I was just saying to His Excellency before, there's a trade-off here when you buy new wagons and new locomotives to spend more on the bogies than you might otherwise do in order to get less of a demand, or to secure less of a demand for a perfect track. And so one of the challenges for us is to get that engineering balance right, because bringing the track up to pristine standard is an incredibly difficult thing to do in Tasmania. So I think a number of other short-haul railways around the world are in fact narrow gauge. New Zealand, for example. Some of the others we like to compare ourselves, Botswana, we try not and set the benchmark too high, is what I'm trying to say.
Any other questions? Over here.
Christopher Crack from SEMF. Sounds like the Brighton hub has been a big advantage to TasRail. Question is, what do you envisage happening to the line from the hub into the wharf area or the CBD of Hobart?
I think the Brighton hub will be, when we can take advantage of it, will be a great help to us. The second part of the question is, as far as we're concerned, it moves to being a non-operational part of the network. That brings with it a number of challenges. There are people eyeing it as an opportunity and looking at it as you know, to bring on, for example, heritage rail or tourist rail. Just because it's non-operational, from our point of view, however, doesn't mean, well, it's there, anyone can use it. There are still a range of requirements, and I think on that line there are 24 level crossings in that section coming through Glenorchy, and somebody has to maintain them. They're expensive to maintain. They clearly are critical safety elements of the system, and so it will become non-operational from our point of view. One would hope we can all find a way, and I want to say all, meaning the whole community, to use both it and other parts of the network for heritage and tourist rail. You know, as an ex-chairman of Tourism Tasmania, I would be delighted if we can bring that off. But there are some very significant challenges, not least of which is the impact on insurance premiums of putting passengers onto what is a freight standard railway.
Heather Hazelgrove from Metro Tasmania. When I move around the state, people talk to me about passenger rail, long haul. You call it short haul, but we'd probably call it long haul. What are your views about having passengers on your network between Brighton and Launceston, etc.?
Yep. Trust me, it would be a long haul for those passengers as well. The now Premier said to me when she was my minister, Bob, we're really looking forward to the possibility that you'll be able to bring back passenger rail. And I said, Premier, one of the points that I'd make to you is that when a piece of freight falls off our train, there's only one person who complains, it's the person forwarding the freight. When passengers fall off your train, everybody complains, including their insurers and whatever. So the answer is there will never be passenger rail back in Tasmania, ever.
Sounds like shares in Metro just read.
Yeah.
Yes, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Bob. It's Alan Richardson from Richardson Associates. Tasmania is heavily serviced by 4 ports, seaports, not so much Hobart, but Launceston or Bell Bay, Devonport and Burnie. What are your views on the number of ports that we, or TasRail, have to service with taking freight into them, and in particular Devonport Port, where the freight line goes in on the western side of the Don River and the containers go out by sea on the eastern side of the river?
Perhaps Norm would like to answer the first part of that question. Look, I'm a Tasmanian. I sort of expect that we'll have a hospital on every corner and a port just around the, up the road. So it's a bit hard. The reality is, I think, that from TasRail's point of view, given the constraints surrounding Burnie physically, there is an absolute limit to how much Burnie can grow as a terminal for rail. We can do some things, but there's not a lot. And so we don't currently service Devonport. We need to. We need to because Sea Road come in and out of Devonport, and they are a major and important player. And quite frankly, we want a chunk of their business. And for us, that means we need to go back into Devonport. The infrastructure is basically there. It needs some upgrading. There's a small problem that it happens to be on the other side of the river from the trains versus where the stuff comes in. What that means, I think, is that we have to take a commercial position to our dealings on that matter. And if we have to take a logistics wide issue and say, well, we'll get it across the river on road, put it on our train, and we'll carry the cost of that. If that's what we've got to do, then we'll seriously think about it, or we share it, or we do something commercial. But sitting around saying, well, the train's on the other side, nothing we can do, wring our hands, not sustainable. So I think Devonport, it's not a big deal for us to go in there. One of the things that this new train plan is going to deliver for us, we will start very soon a Launceston, Devonport, Launceston, Burnie link. We will start very soon a Georgetown to Burnie link. We already have the capacity, though unfortunately there's no ships going into Bell Bay, but we put back a Bell Bay service. It was always going to cost us a lot of money to go back into Bell Bay. The freight was never there. We went back in because we took a bigger picture for Tasmania, and we wanted to support Bell Bay as a port. Now, it didn't work, but wasn't for lack of trying. So I just think for us, it is what it is. And therefore, if we want to be a serious player here, then we've got to provide customer service.
Thanks, Bob. Unless there's any pressing question, what I'll now do is invite our chair to come forward to give a vote of thanks to Bob on his behalf.
Thanks, Robert. Your Excellency, distinguished guests, welcome. It's been a wonderful lunch and a great presentation by Bob. I think two parts, part fascinating as a business owner, part frightening as a taxpayer. I can see Norm sitting there smiling, and I understand why now. What a challenge ahead. So it certainly adds some depth to the debate about something that is, or has been in many ways, a political football and not really been that well understood, I think, in the state. People sit there and have said, do we go with road, do we go with rail? What are the mixes of both? And I think you've really shed some light on that, Bob. So I'd like, on behalf of TCCI and everyone here, like to say thank you very much for coming to present, both here and in Launceston, and it was thoroughly enjoyable. While I've got you here for a couple of minutes, it's an opportunity just to give you a bit of an update on what the TCCI is doing and where we're going over the next 6 months. We have three key priorities. The first is obviously making sure that we see the budget reined in. The second is planning reform, and the third is local government reform. We're getting to the accountability end of the year. We're nearly 6 months into the budget, and we're going to start to see where the government's finished up, and it becomes a question back to essentially you as our members and as business leaders and community members, what you're prepared to accept and what you want to see done with essentially your community, because the place is being managed for us, not the other way around. We are keen to make sure that we see some change in each of those spaces that we've mentioned. It's particularly important that going forward, we see some efficiencies through all levels of government, and we make the place a more competitive place to do business. But the TCCI is but one, is a single voice. We need your support as members to make sure that we're effective. So certainly in the next 6 months, you'll see us more out actively in those spaces, but also don't be surprised if you get a tap on the shoulder or get asked for your expertise or assistance in making sure that we help produce a better state and better outcomes. So with that, I will say thanks again. Thank you to the Governor, Your Excellency, for joining us, and over to you, Robert.
Thanks, Bob. Well, we're just about right back on time now. Just a couple of minutes, and just a few things I'd like to do, a few thank yous. Thank you to Damien and your staff, particularly Jennifer Jarvis, working with Judy Fair from TCCI to organise today. These things just don't happen, as you know, and it's not as hard as trying to run a railway, but to get everyone seated before the Governor gets in the room when there's a good chatter and a drink out on the foyer, I think we didn't do too bad a job. The other people I'd just like to very quickly thank is to Martin Thorpe also. Martin is employed with TasRail, but equally he's the chair of the Tasmanian Transport Association and the Logistics Council, and that's a critical part of what plays the roles that are played in logistics. As an island state, of course, we don't have any choice. 98% comes via sea, and only 2% of our freight needs comes by air. if, for example, the rail line, and I got into trouble 18 months ago nearly 2 years ago when I started in this role, and there were some severe derailments along the northwest coast, and I made the comment that Bell Bay needed upgrading, and immediately there's a few sensitive people from Devonport beyond said, well, hang on, we've got a port at Burnie. But let me just tell you this, that if Burnie and Devonport, but if indeed there was a major disruption to that track, which is single track only, for a week or two, Hobart would starve. That's how critical logistics is in this state. And we don't have the options that other states have. So what Bob and Damien and their team are doing are absolutely first class. And it's also very important to hear and to see, and I also sit on the Minister's Infrastructure Advisory Council, of which the chair is here today, Phil Clark, is that the priorities that are taken now by the other government agencies is coming together. We were only talking yesterday at our council meeting that for one of the first times in many years, the 6 or 8 government agencies and GBOs are in a position where they're working together, they're trying to understand what each other's doing, and it's coming together extremely well.